Hello and welcome to another episode of Michelson Alexander Explains. I'm your host, Jack Banister, Michelson Alexander's head of content. This week on the show, we were really fortunate to be joined by one of the world's most creative minds to discuss all things artificial intelligence and city reshaping technology. Assaf Biderman is the CEO and co-founder of transportation robotics company Superpedestrian, who are a client of ours at Michelson Alexander. He's also a founding member and the associate director of the Senseable City Lab at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT for short. Senior associate Andrew Stewart and associate Sabrine Navarro were lucky enough to pick his brain about the ways AI is being already used and how it can reshape transport in the future. Before we dive into this episode, you'll hear a few key terms that it's worth me explaining in advance. So Superpedestrian is the industry leader in smart e-transport. You'll hear them mentioned throughout. They've pioneered the Superpedestrian e-scooter, the super scooter with the brain, which can self-diagnose and keep its rider and other road users safe. We'll talk a lot about micromobility, which refers to lightweight vehicles, usually electric and often operated through shared schemes, like e-bikes and e-scooters. Multi-modality is another word you'll hear thrown a lot. It refers to getting from A to B with more than one mode of transport. So it might be a train into the city and then a tram to your final destination. With those out the way, let's get on with the episode. Here's Sabrine and Andy with Assaf.
Hi, Assaf, and thanks so much for joining us. We're here to talk about AI, and obviously AI is all around us, but I think the average person probably thinks of it more like science fiction than an actual thing. I also think of words like blockchain and machine learning, Internet of Things. So my first question to you is to really kick things off is, where do you think the public's understanding of AI is, and how does that match up to what AI actually is?
I would never pretend to know what is the public's understanding of AI. What is the public? But I can say that often I think people imagine more than there is. People think of machines that can really, get close to having consciousness and things like that. We're very, very far away from this. Autonomy and decision making is very, very far from us still. But what we do have is large-scale regression capabilities that allow us to basically train models with a lot of data. And if we train these models right, we can have remarkable observations made on data and remarkable conclusions and remarkable analysis made in real time in ways that humans can't do. May look intelligent. I don't know if that's the right way to call it just yet. But it's very powerful, those large-scale regressions, and there are many, many uses for those. And in transportation, we see quite a few applications. The most notable one is in vision, right? So it's people know as a driverless car or autonomous vehicles. And that's an application, and it can be a transformative event with some positive sides to it, with negative sides to it as well. There are other applications, plenty of others in transportation, from routing and prediction of demand, how vehicles move, how do we optimize so that vehicles move the least amount of miles empty and are as full as possible, all the way through to how the software on the vehicle itself is managed. Like, what can a vehicle predict when it might get a problem or need to go to a mechanic and do something to avoid it, almost like a vaccine?
Just to jump in, I know that's something that Superpedestrian is quite proud of. Some of their work with the intelligence on board the scooters. So is it something like Superpedestrian has AI on board?
So Superpedestrian has software that begins on the vehicle and continues to the cloud. We do predictions, we do real-time analytics, and we use vast amounts of data. And primarily the fact that we have created what we know of as the world's first and today only full-blown operating system for a vehicle, meaning we write every line of code on our vehicles. And as a result, we're able to start to look at how everything behaves in real time and draw conclusions from it. And all of a sudden, you're able to tell when even the most minute things are going out of norm. Something's overheating, the battery is getting out of balance, there's water penetration, there's a component that's not performing right. And you can take action so quickly to avert the problem from escalating into something harmful. And when we do that, the results are dramatic. It may sound geeky and technical, but this type of analysis allows you, to make sure that the vehicle fails the least, meaning it's out there, it's providing service, it's running, but also it reduces the chances that it fails in a way that could harm the rider. And there's been a lot of those happening, right? We've seen those happening in the Australia-New Zealand region in the past, significantly so, and it can all be avoided. And this software, this unique thing that we're doing, really gets at the heart of it. So take care of problems before they really become problems. That's number one. And number two, sorry, that's aspect number two. Aspect number three that this kind of software enables is that the operation becomes so much better, so much more dependable, that it also changes the economics behind it, so that you can start to build a real sustainable business behind micromobility. As we know, it is a very tough business. Cities do not yet pay for micromobility, and as a result, it's a difficult capex heavy business that none of the incumbents has yet been able to make work financially. And this gets in the way of A, making it work financially, and B, making it so that you can then provide equitable service across a city. To be practical, it makes it so that you don't just go to where the highest demand is, and which is usually where the wealthiest potential users are. Right? So you can provide equitable service. That's a very important part of our mandate. There's another outcome of this, which is if our vehicles end up having an issue, they can raise their hand and say, hey, I'm going out of service myself, I'm not providing any more rides, and open their own service tickets and say, hey, here's what happened to me, fix me, please. And then as they get fixed, they can actually ask, was I fixed okay? And if they determine they were, they go back into service. And these are just tiny examples of much more that we're doing. And that is fundamental for safety. That's fundamental for reliability. It minimizes the time the vehicles are down, has a lot of impact on operation, and it's unique. Cars don't do this kind of stuff that I'm talking about, let alone light electric vehicles. I want to add a point here, if I may, which is, so Superpedestrian is a spin-off from the Senseable City Lab at MIT. I'm a founding member of that lab and joined it as it was founded in 2004. And I ran much of the transportation research there. And what we've looked at is, the lab is at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, Senseable City Lab. And we've looked at the problem of transportation from the perspective of cities, meaning you look at the urban problem and you ask, how can technology help us address it? Technology is not the end goal. It's just a means, right? At the end of the day, what we have, like the issues that cities face is a fundamental one, and it's not new. It's going back to the mid-'80s, where transport demand has begun to rise, and it hasn't slowed down since. Right? And we're expecting 3x increase in demand by the middle of this century. But practically every city today, small, medium, or large, across the world, is overbooked at least twice a day. Peak morning, peak afternoon, right? So there's no more space on the road, yet demand keeps on increasing. 3 times more people. Where are we going to put 3 times more people on the streets by 2050 if today there's no more space anymore. So, and that's a fundamental problem. So we look at this issue, with the urban context in mind, and it's recognized that the most probable solution to this issue is multimodal transportation. Why? Because you make the most optimal use of space. How do you replace a car trip with an alternative mode of transportation? Well, if you're downtown, you're probably taking a small 1 or 2 person vehicle, like a scooter or like a bicycle, or you walk. But if you're coming in from the suburbs, you can't just walk all the way. You can't walk 10, 15 kilometers, right? You can't take a scooter for 15 kilometers. Most people don't. You can, but most people don't. So how do you combine between multiple modes, like a small vehicle and then a mass transit solution, and then you walk on the other end or take another small vehicle? And you can plan that. You can plan around that. You can put vehicles in the right nodes. You can integrate with the capacity that is in transit systems in a deliberate way to enable mode shift. So that's very much in the heart of our mandate as well. And the solutions that we work on, those software solutions, those vehicle intelligence solutions that we've discussed earlier, are all with that in mind. How can you make a solution that's safe enough, that's affordable enough, so you can scale it and create mode shift?
Yeah, and bringing it back to AI there, if we're talking about regression models of large sets of data, encouraging that mode shift. So, for example, taking a train to a hub and then a e-scooter into the CBD, for example, is there scope for AI to have a role in taking a look at the large set of data of how people move around the city, the urban areas and the suburban areas, and deciding where those nodes should be? Yeah,
well, there's been tremendous progress. I mean, if you look, there's a publication from the Senseable City Lab on Nature, 2017, I believe, on shareability, where our research group, and there are other groups that have looked at the similar problem, have found an optimal solution regarding how to take a picture of demand and apply it to multiple modes of transportation simultaneously in the most optimal way. Right? And I'm oversimplifying slightly the description, but imagine today, if you're able to feed a computer system, a network, with information about what is the demand for transportation, can you actually analyze that data, predict what demand would be in the future? Can you train a model so that you can then match supply in the most optimal way to that demand? And you can do that on taxis, you can do that on micromobility, or you can do that on a combination of any mode thereof, transit plus micromobility plus taxi, or other modes. And that's very, very powerful. That is driven by machine learning, right? So because your demand prediction models are based on that. And in this particular instance, the problem was converted to the network domain, which is how it became computationally feasible to compute. Because if you look at the problem of dispatch, that you want to say get a ride from point A to point B, if you want to look at the most optimal solution for that, it requires knowing what all the demand is in the city in real time when you're seeking transportation, and then computing the most optimal solution to deploy the right vehicles to every single person who wants a ride in the city. That is what's called an NP-complete problem. That's a hard to compute problem. If you clicked an iPhone, so to speak, and waited for the result in such a system using ordinary computational methods, it will take longer than you're willing to wait. And that particular solution was converting the problem to the network domain, computing it very fast and yielding a good enough result for an absolute optimum. So it's just an example, technical example of how you can use machine learning also for the purpose of dispatch.
I just wanted to touch on that point of the technology and the ideas that you've come up to solve the problems that are shaping our cities today. I just wanted to know how many of those ideas start with a problem, or are most of your ideas that you come up for new technology, are they spawned out of your everyday, day-to-day life, and then you see that problem? Or is it something else that, people come up to you? I just want to know how those ideas are made and born.
Look, the problem that we're solving today at Superpedestrian is not something that requires a lot of digging to become aware of. Right? This is in the academic context, it's what a lot of transportation planners and transportation engineers are looking at. What's new is that now you got applications from computer science coming in as well to address these age-old problems. Like the modeling of transportation has been around since the 70s in an advanced form and has made tremendous progress. Discrete choice modeling and these types of mathematical solutions have gained a lot of traction and were deployed around the world in commercial applications for transportation systems. All of a sudden, you can use new type of software analysis and machine learning based models in order to address similar problems of how do you match supply and demand. At the same time, now you're able to put a lot more computation on board the vehicle. So you got these cheaper and stronger processors you can put on board, and all of a sudden you can have a smart control system that can impact how the vehicle functions, how safe it is, how much it costs to move, how far it can go, how heavy a person it can carry, etc. And that really changes things. Whether it is on the battery side, the side of improvements in battery technologies, and particularly in computational capabilities, it creates a new condition. So you have a confluence of things. You got new technologies, you got the problems which are well established, and they converge, and they sort of presented us with an opportunity to start and act on these problems that we're all well aware of in new ways. Now, if you're asking a bigger picture question, I personally have a fascination with cities. I love them. I think they are, it's well proven that they are the best way to come together from the standpoint of impact on the planet, right? We consume the least when we are together in groups. We produce the most, and yet they pose a challenge. They're they're also the biggest emitters around the world. And if we don't supply them, for example, with more transportation into the future, they're going to stop. They're going to become stagnant, right? It's the bloodline. So the cities grow and grow and grow. They need to be provided with more and more transportation. And the way we provide cities with transportation today cannot be continued. Even if all vehicles switch to electric, it is not a solution, because we have 80% of our vehicles empty, and that takes too much space on the road.
How would you say then how much of our infrastructure of our cities are yet to be optimized to accommodate this micromobility movement?
You tell me. Micromobility is not just a solution. It's not just about scooters or e-bikes. We need one-person and two-person cars. Right? We'll see those in the future. Right? It's if our autonomous vehicle future is that of large SUVs and limousines, we're screwed. Right? There will be some of those, but I hope it's just a few, because we're going to have so many more people and goods trying to move through our streets. And especially if the friction to move, the price goes down, right? Then we're going to have more demand. And as a result, you want to make sure that the size of the vehicle matches the size of what it's trying to move a lot better than what we have today. Otherwise, we're basically misusing road space, which is one of our most precious resources in a city. It's very limited. You can't double the width of the streets tomorrow. They are what they are, pretty much.
I think that touches on a point that I often think about, which is autonomous vehicles being touted as the future of transport. But if you've got essentially 60,000 cars with one or two people in it. Everyone wants to be driven around by a chauffeur, and if that becomes accessible, it's not going to solve any transport solutions. It's actually going to be a transport problem. A lot of people with one or two people in the car on the back in their phone. I know when Uber first came to Australia, the amount of times that I would catch an Uber skyrocketed. So how do you see autonomous vehicles fitting into the transport solution, sort of balancing that?
I'll speak about some obvious positives, right? If you're blind, you can drive, right? That's incredible. If you're disabled, right? Okay, so people who were excluded from, moving around easily could all of a sudden have a significant improvement in their life. It's great. Safety. There will be positive implications, most probably on safety. Probably cars will be a lot slower also, right? But safety is probably another area. Logistics, right? Look at parcel, for example. We are seeing unprecedented amount of delivery of parcel. If I'm not wrong, and this needs to be verified, 2019, we moved about 50 billion parcel worldwide, and we're eclipsing 100 billion in 2021. And 2019 was a huge year. I believe it was all-time high. That kind of growth in demand for transportation is not observed in personal mobility. Like, you don't have a 2x increase in demand within 2 years. That's something that just doesn't happen. So all of a sudden we see something on those orders, even if the numbers I quote are slightly off. The order is right. So something on those orders does not happen. These parcels use the same streets that we use. So if we're able to move them autonomously, say at night, okay, that becomes interesting. If they can move in small boxes, becomes interesting. Or, there are many other logistical issues related to that. How do you get them to the end customers, etc.? But staying at the high level, the positives could be for logistics. The positives could be for safety, for the disabled. The negatives could be that just a lot more things would want to move. You could, if you're very wealthy, you could build a bedroom on wheels, right? So you don't spend time, moving. Just go to sleep one place, wake up in another place, right? And so on and so forth. My 7-year-old daughter, I don't want to take her to school tomorrow. Okay, here you go. Go in a car by yourself while I go in another car somewhere else. We just doubled the number of cars on the streets and then doubled demand for that particular moment. And we can come up with a lot of those. I'm staying so at the shallow level here. So it's all about how we use these technologies. Technologies in and of themselves, they could lead to, you need a direction. We know that. For transit, it could be a revolution. Right? If it could really be a revolution. If we come up with the right types of vehicles, with the right scale of vehicles, you can imagine then a combination of very large, what's called trunk-based, sort of shared origins and destinations, mass transit solutions that would have feeders into them of smaller vehicles, low cost. That could really push mode shift in a significant way. So I think it could be blessed, and we should just take the challenge upon ourselves to manage these technologies right and regulate them right.
Just to follow up on that point, a lot of the work we do at Michelson Alexander is social impact. We want to make sure that the companies that we're working with have an ethos of wanting to contribute to a better world. And you've talked a lot about some of the positives and the potential for this technology to be a force for good. As you say, it is not a force for good itself. It can be used as a tool to affect positive change. How do we go about using these technologies to make sure that they're accessible to everyone from all walks of life, from people who might have vision impairment to people who are socioeconomically disadvantaged? How do we make sure that AI and these transport solutions that we're talking about are not just for the top 10%?
Look, so first of all, it's a great question. Second of all, to be more specific, which technologies exactly are you talking about? I mean, just to ask, how do we make sure AI is not for the top 1% is a big question. right? Let's narrow it down a little bit.
Let's narrow it to transport.
Because we know AI can be discriminatory. It's as good as how you train it, right? A machine learning model is as good as what you train it with, and who trains it usually. So if you talk about transportation, let me talk about micromobility specifically, right? So we need to strive, number one, to make it accessible economically across the board. I think that's a first priority, right? And for that, I know cities are going to love this, and I know our competitors are going to love this. I think cities are going to have to pay eventually, right? Today they don't, because they get it for free and everybody plays the same game. That's fine. But like any other transport solution that needs to become equitable, this is not sustainable economically otherwise. If you really want to change a city and how it moves, a city at the scale of Sydney needs, 50, 60,000 micro-electric vehicles on its periphery in order to create 20, 25% mode shift, right? These are analysis that we've done, and that's to integrate micromobility with its transit network. Now if you look at the utilization that would come out of that on a system like this, it would be under half a trip per day. No company would provide that service, but at a cost of a couple of $100 million a year to a city, would a city fund that to create 25% mode shift? Of course they would, right? So I think in a decade or two, we'll see that happening. It's a topic nobody wants to talk about, but that's the truth. Just like cities pay for buses, just like cities pay for many other transit solutions. If that is for the public good, it will happen. Now, in the meantime, there's a lot you can do before you reach these huge scales of deployments and impact big mode shift that you can do private sector alone, right? In order to provide more equitable service. And that has to do primarily with how cost effective your service is. Oh, of course, you can subsidize that yourself and lose money, but there's only a limited amount of time you can do that for, right? So if you're talking sustainably, to do that, then there needs to be a substantial deployment of technology on board the vehicle in order to remove the amount of labor and the depreciation of the vehicles themselves, to minimize it, so that you can provide a much more equitable service. So that's something that we excel in, and it's very important for us. So we deployed much of the savings to provide equitable service, number one. Number two is regarding the disabled community. I think there is a little bit of a double standard, because you're not going to ask or offer a scooter service to a blind person. That doesn't make any sense, right? And I see cities sometimes putting that in their RFPs. I'm like, okay, there are much better solutions. Okay, there are much better. There is money to be spent on infrastructure. That's important, both audible signals and haptic signals, in public transit solutions that are badly needed. And let's say if you're in a wheelchair, right? There are powered wheelchair solutions that are incredible, that can be applied today, are much better than saying, okay, let's put somebody on a bicycle. So I see a lot of nonsensical asks sometimes, and I think solving alternative mobility, micro mobility for people with disability is a huge world. We've designed a couple of wheelchair solutions 5 years ago at Superpedestrian, and there's a lot of work to do on that, but we have quite an advanced solution as an example. That's a world that requires, significantly bigger investments than designing the scooters and the e-bikes, because it comes with a lot of responsibility, right? So yes, you can offer solutions that will let's say provide or address a need for a small portion of the population, people with disabilities. I think if you really want to address this issue more deeply, there needs to be special dedicated programs for new vehicle forms to address specific types of disabilities in partnership with these communities, and they will take years. This is if we're honest. If I talk politics to win a tender, yes, sure, we'll put the powered wheelchair on the thing. Yes.
I think to your point earlier, it's also about making sure that the service that you do have for the 99% of users doesn't in any way impact negatively those people who, in vulnerable communities. So, for example, haptics, sounds, the e-scooter, the Superpedestrian e-scooter, the lights are always on. So people who do have slight vision impairment will be able to see something coming down the way, bells, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and you can program it to make sounds in junctions if you want it, right?
Exactly.
You can use the technology in the right context to help people with disabilities navigate the streets in a much safer way. And by the way, crucial for the mass deployments of micromobility is the interaction with pedestrians at large. Right? At the moment, any vehicle can go on sidewalks. There's not a single solution out there for preventing sidewalk riding. Right? There's a lot of talk, but there's nothing out there that's real, except of our machine learning solution on the edge, our sensor fusion solution, which we call pedestrian defense, which uses basically a large data model that we crunch on board a dedicated chip on our scooters to detect both lanes and the curb itself and the sidewalk to provide over 98 or 99% accurate sidewalk detection and prevention of riding. You get on the sidewalk, stops working, no jokes. Right? So any scooter that has that technology deployed will be able to provide a much safer environment for pedestrians, and that's really important for large scale, mass scale adoption and deployments of micromobility.
There is a lot of acceptance. There's a portion of the world that is in acceptance of micromobility and e-scooters, but I am very mindful that there are some people that are yet to jump on board e-scooters, hence the safety aspect that you guys are addressing. But I just want to ask you, what are some of the barriers of some of the widespread acceptance of micromobility, and how would we address that? How does Superpedestrian address that on top of a safety issue?
I think the barriers, the first barrier that's key is the interaction with pedestrians, what I talked about earlier. Sidewalk riding, prevention of sidewalk riding, that's crucial. Are you in the bike lane? Are you in the car lane? What speed are you riding? We need to be able to enforce those things autonomously, and we have unique technologies there to address that. Second issue is equity. Right? How do you provide an equitable solution so it's not just a toy for rich people? Right? And the third thing is cities. Do cities have skin in the game? At the moment, not enough. Right? We'll help our city partners. We develop dashboards, technologies, data feeds, invested almost 10 years now in engineering these city-specific solutions. Cities will eventually have to be like not just partners, but partners with skin in the game. And I think we're going in that direction. We already see significant signs.
I think the other issue, to get political, in Australia is that there haven't been universal regulations or legislations on e-scooters. So in many states, they were illegal. People would still use them, and the police wouldn't really crack down on them. And any injury that happens, from a scooter that might be doing 60 kilometers an hour. Some of these scooters out there can do 60, 70 kilometers an hour.
Really? Wow.
There's some, I think they're called hyper scooters. And they any injury that is seen there is instantly tied back to the shared operators, which are the only sort of names and faces in Australia using or deploying micromobility. So I think we're at the stage now where we're starting to get legislation and regulations across the state, which will be able to enforce the use of e-scooters in a safe and sensible manner. I think that's one issue that we're coming up against. And also in Melbourne, very much so, is the issue of parking. You remember a couple of dockless transport operators who will remain nameless. A lot of their devices got thrown to the bottom of the Yarra and cast up trees and things like that. So it sounds like Superpedestrian might have a solution for that with its intelligent system knowing where the scooters are at any time.
Yeah, it's not just knowing where they are, it's knowing where they are in a high-rise environment where you know, if you open your phone, your maps don't show you where you really are. You're sometimes in the sea, you're sometimes on a roof, right? There's shadow, there's reflection from high buildings. We solve that problem. And that's a tough problem to solve. That's, tens of millions over the years in investment. So there's real serious technology behind solving these problems that might sound simple. But at the end of the day, we think there are technological solutions to some of these problems. For example, the scooter mess. Where do you park? Where do you ride? What speed are you in? Are you in the lane? Are you out of the lane? Are you on the sidewalk? Are you off the sidewalk? Are you in the right parking space or not? These are completely solvable. More importantly, the safety issues, the safety problems we've seen in the past in Australia and New Zealand should have never happened. Totally avoidable. Crappy engineering, bottom line. It's just crappy engineering. Totally avoidable. These things should not happen. And yes, you're asking, are there going to be accidents? There are. It's unfortunate. It's inevitable. But you got to do your best to minimize it. Right? You got to do your best. And there's so much advanced technology you can deploy in order to make it the most safe micromobility deployment in a city. So that's sort of our mandate. That's what we pride ourselves in.
Assaf, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure speaking to you, picking your brain on all things AI, livable cities, and micromobility. We could talk for much more, but I'm aware that we've got a busy schedule. So we'll say goodbye to you for now. And I would like to remind everybody to subscribe to the Michelson Alexander podcast for new episodes coming in the future.